All right, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Welcome to episode 12 of the Gospel Works podcast, where we discuss how the gospel applies to work and life. We're your hosts. I'm Aaron Giesler of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this is my friend and co-laborer in Christ, Josh M.
Hey, Aaron, good to be here. Back talking about risk once again.
Dude, we're risking it by having 12 episodes.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal. But somehow it's paid off.
It
Not
has.
with actual money, but with spiritual rewards.
I pat myself on the back daily.
Yeah. I just check my heavenly bank account.
Eternal rewards. That's what we
Yeah.
offer here at the church. Eternal
Right.
benefits.
Grace Church, where we have an app to help you track your heavenly rewards.
We do not. All right. Well, we're in part 2 of risk and faith. And so, Josh, you want to give us an overview or a review of how we left off?
Yeah. So last time we talked about the fact that risk and uncertainty are part of God's creation from the beginning. It's what it means that we are not God. If we're not God, then we don't know everything, and that means there's things that we don't know. And in particular, God created a universe where our job or our role is not just to ask God what to do, but to be independent in some senses.
What does that mean?
Well, it just means that if we were completely dependent, and I say completely dependent, so not just for our being, which is true, not just for creation, which is true, but if God just wanted us to do exactly what he said, like a play-by-play, kind of like you control a video game, right? If you're playing shooter, you turn left, it turns left. It never turns right without you. It never shoots without you.
Unless your controller's messed up.
Yeah, unless your controller's messed up. Right. God did not create the world as a video game. He created it where we have some amount of responsibility and meaningful choice.
Yeah.
And since you combine that with a lack of perfect knowledge, uncertainty and risk has to be there, even before sin.
Yeah, and that's part of it because we're finite.
Right. We're not omniscient. We would like to be. I think that's like if you said, what does Western culture want to be? It's like we want to be able to do everything and know everything.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we forget that we're not too.
Yeah. And we set that kind of as a goal sometimes.
Yeah.
Not thinking like, hey, that's actually playing God.
Yeah. And so we don't have knowledge, and we are lacking in. We have some knowledge, but we don't have all of it, and we have some control, but we don't have all.
Right. And so where we want to go today is, well, what does that mean? So we talked about how.
So do we just wing it?
Just wing it. Well, we saw last time that faith has to be the foundation of that discussion.
Yep.
If we don't look at the world through the light of the gospel and a good God who is all powerful, who does know everything, who is loving, we're not going to get anywhere.
Okay.
But we can't stop at faith.
What do you mean stop it? Like, do you mean just stop at like I believe? So, like mental assent?
Yes. So if we remember that Proverbs says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Well, fear of the Lord, you can kind of translate that as faith. It doesn't say the fear of the Lord is the end of everything, because now you've got the fear, so you can just do it.
So now I can just wing it?
Right. You can just wing.
I really just want to wing it. I don't know if you can tell. But
no, but the reason why there's a book of Proverbs and Job and
all the wisdom literature,
and then a lot of Paul's teachings and Jesus' teachings is just knowing that there's a God and knowing that he loves us, and knowing all about God isn't enough to live in the world that God created for us. Just like when God created Adam and Eve and he said, hey, go name all the animals.
They believed he existed?
They definitely believed he existed.
But then they had to go do something.
That they didn't really know how to do that, to kind of figure some things out.
That's my favorite, when somebody's like, well, I don't need, I just believe. And then I quote old James, like, so do the demons.
Yeah.
So where are we going to go? How are we going to talk about faith as the beginning of our journey, not the completion of it?
I like the story of Hebrews. particularly Hebrews 11,
The Hall of Fame of Faith.
the Hall of Fame of Faith. Everybody is familiar with it to some extent if they've spent some time in church. If they haven't, it does kind of provide a nice background because everybody, well, let's just look at it. Hebrews 11, we'll start at the beginning. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for, being convinced of what we do not see. So it starts by saying that faith exists primarily in a world full of uncertainty. It's not, even to Joseph and Mary, even to Jacob, even to Moses, those people that saw God, there was still so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
Or else they wouldn't have been full of faith. We're defining it. Faith is being sure of what we hope for, being convinced of what we do not see.
So faith is that it's certainty and uncertainty.
Right.
It is certainty when certainty is elusive.
It's like hanging on to the thing that you do know as you walk into the thing that you don't know.
And there's a lot of those.
And there's a lot of those. I mean, even if, as we think about Joseph and Mary, like they knew that God was in charge of this baby being conceived, and they knew that they'd been spoken to by angels. They knew a lot of things. They didn't know what raising the Son of God was going to be like. They didn't know a million things. In fact, we could say that they didn't know more than they did know.
Yeah.
But they're commended for their faith, as the second verse says. For by faith, the people of old received God's commendation. By faith, we understand that the worlds were set in order at God's command, so that the visible has its origins in the invisible. It's like all these stories that come to us are not things that we directly experienced. We may have a direct experience that helps confirm those things. The Holy Spirit works in our heart to testify to us. But Hebrews 11, at least, is defining faith in terms of not being completely certain. I was reading this book about the Inquisition, and those people were so sure that they knew exactly what people had done wrong, and they were willing to just go after them. Hebrews 11 is saying, it's like you're holding on to what God has told you in faith as you walk into all the other things that you don't know and you haven't seen.
Yeah. And then if you keep going in Hebrews 11, he gives, whoever wrote Hebrews,
uncertain also.
I have certainty that it was written and uncertainty that I don't who. Right. But, it's like, Noah built an ark. Can you imagine what it took when God's like, hey, I need you to build this thing because it's going to do something it's never done before?
Right.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Hey, Abraham, I know you're old and probably comfortable, but it's time for you to move. But just by yourself, though. Leave all your family, all the people that support you, your social security net, the people that protect you from bad guys.
Marauders.
Just take off. It's going to work out.
And I will go until I tell you to, I'll say when.
Man, can you imagine having a workout where it's like, hey, you're going to do squats. How many? Until.
Well, I mean, how many times have you been told, we're going to run until I get tired by a coach? That's right. Very similar. It says Moses spoke before Pharaoh. He could have his head chopped off for for what he did when he was younger.
Oh,
or just going before him anyways.
Yeah.
But he still did it because God commanded it.
Yeah. We talk about the promised land. There's Joshua and Caleb. There's Rahab, who didn't even know anything about God, but was able to act in faith.
Man, and then Gideon and his theater troupe.
Right.
What you're going to do, you're going to surround 200,000 men with 300 people, and you're going to do a chant, like a cheerleading chant.
Right.
Hurrah. And then you're going to
break some clay pots,
and there's going to be fire in it. Like, it really is like an improv night.
Right.
But they did it, and it worked.
Elijah, Mary and Joseph, John the Baptist, the disciples following Jesus.
Coming, I'll make you fishers of men. That sounds like a good career.
Right.
But Mom, he said fishers of men.
How many dollars do you think one man goes for? Hopefully we sell them by the pound, because
there was probably way less fat people back then.
Gosh, it's like you could. there's a way you could say that faith is taking risk in the name of God. But we can't stop with just the good examples. There's a lot of people in the scriptures and also not in the scriptures who have taken some really bad risks.
Let's just stick to the scriptures for a little bit because there's too many non-scriptural ones.
Like the Jim Jones guys.
Yeah.
That was a bad risk.
Yeah. Like, I mean, whenever the Israelites took the ark into battle because they treated it like a good luck charm, not like what it really was, God's presence.
Also didn't work out too good for them when the Philistines took it back to their house.
It did not work out for them.
Right.
Lots of tumors of gold and
Right. Samson took a lot. Samson, super strong, right? But man, he took a lot of risks.
unnecessarily terrible risks.
Just thought he was invincible. Like, hey, I'm going to tell you the secret of my strength because, I don't know, the other some amount of times it didn't work. But
Yeah.
even though you betrayed me already, how many times?
Every time. Every times. Jacob deceiving his brother and his father and his father. I mean, Jacob was a real trickster. He
Yeah.
was a real tricky guy. None of those were from faith. They were all self-protective.
So it's like you've got this, just because you're taking a risk doesn't make it faith. And just because you put God's name on something doesn't mean that it's faith. Again, we quoted this book already, but that Samuel Chand book, Leadership Pain, like so many of those guys were taking great risks that I consider to be very faithful on redemption of people or relationships. But quite a few of them took risks on a expansion chart that they built in Excel that said that they were going to have their church was going to quadruple in size, so they might as well borrow $40 million to build a new church.
Hey,
that
they did that on faith.
on faith. But so if I said without faith from Hebrews, it's impossible to please God.
You would be right.
But God also takes no delight in fools from Ecclesiastes.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is winging it is not the preferred mode.
It's not. Unless God told you to wing it.
No, I mean, but then is that really winging it?
No.
No. I mean, I say this from the pulpit. It's like, there's a lot of things we shouldn't do unless if the Lord tells you to, like, whatever he tells you,
Yeah,
just do it.
that's like Nike.
Yeah. But like, it needs to be not like, oh,
I had a feeling.
I had a feeling, a dream, came to me in a prayer time. No, it needs to be like God was like, hello.
Right. It needs to be written by a hand floating on a wall.
Yeah, or an angel that you think you're going to die.
Right.
Whenever you see that angel.
I think in the scripture, there's pretty much no instance of someone having God say something to them and then they didn't know it, except the 5-year-old Samuel, who just woke up from nap time.
He's
like,
I'm here. You called me?
yeah, just has those big blinky eyes.
Yeah. What did you want, Eli? I didn't call you. Go back to bed. Other than that, yeah, it's pretty much thought you were going to die.
Yeah. So following Jesus, it requires faith, but it also requires wisdom, which is why God tells us to seek after it and to buy it with whatever the cost.
It's a real problem for those of us that like to wing it.
Right. Yeah. I think the problem is for most of us, faith and wisdom are kind of like two different games. And so we either use faith or we use wisdom. And when I say wisdom here,
Yeah.
a lot, you can't have not faith-based wisdom and it be biblical wisdom, because the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, right? But if we talk about kind of that worldly wisdom that we're also, the understanding of how the world works, that we are also supposed to pursue, that can be made without faith.
The faith-wisdom dichotomy rings a little bit like the sacred secular, see podcast 3 if you haven't. The sacred secular divide. It's like, oh, well, no, I'm going to use faith in this instance and no wisdom. I'm just going to use wisdom in this instance, but no faith.
Yeah. I don't know how many times I've heard someone say, well, it doesn't make sense if you crunch the numbers, but
Yeah.
I'm stepping out in faith. And again, if God's told you to do something, or if you look at the scripture and you talk to your community, and
Loving
you're like,
my enemy doesn't really make sense numbers wise.
right. And it's like, this is the thing that I have to do.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense for me I'm too young to have a kid yet. It does, crunching the numbers, it doesn't add up. But I feel like that's what I need to do. But then there's a lot of times where we crunch the numbers and we forget about
Faith.
the faith part.
Yeah. I mean, that's so, like you said, it's impossible to please God without faith. Not you. I mean, you quoted Hebrews 11, and then you quoted Proverbs, but God takes no delight in fools. And so it's like, well, I'm just going to go by faith, but no wisdom. It's like, well, does God take delight in that? Probably not. Well, I'm going to use wisdom because God delights in that. But how are you going to please God if you're going to do something without faith?
Yeah. So today we're going to look at risk. We're going to try to look at if we call it the worldly side of it, like how our perspectives on risk have changed over time, how technology and math and science have changed things, and then look at kind of what stayed the same, and then we'll talk about how that affects not only us, but also our world and our work.
So a lot of people when at their work, they'll have risk analysis.
Ooh.
Especially if you're up in leadership or C-suite stuff, or you do something. There's a pretty dangerous aspect of your job.
Right.
I am reminded of The Office. The people that work in the office go down into the warehouse, and Michael Scott wants to use the baling machine, and they're like, "No, it's too dangerous." But then he's like, "You guys need to go back to the office. You all don't have any risk there." And then they end up trying to jump off the
right.
talking about depression. Anyways, but it's like, but no matter what, kind of job you have, there's risk out there.
And people have always known about risks, but our perspective on risk has changed kind of a ton.
Explain that.
Well, if I said there was a lot of common sense thinking about risk in the first century or in the 12th century BC, but you don't see insurance until Pascal and the boys, Bernoulli and Bayes, they start working out the math behind quantifying uncertainty, quantifying risk. In the first century, you don't have actuaries. Even gambling, we're so much more professional at gambling than those guys were, because we could say like, hey, in poker, if you play this hand, there's one. And they didn't have those tools.
Yeah. Because just to compute that takes lots.
Especially without zero or Arabic numerals. So you start trying to divide X, 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 I,
MC.
MC over CM. It's difficult. So it kind of starts again with Descartes, where so much of our stuff comes from.
I do remember in youth group one time, we were talking about the wise man who built his house upon the rock and the sand.
Uh-huh.
And one of the leaders was like, no, that guy could never buy insurance. It's like there would definitely, that he would never pass inspection.
Right.
It would have to be compacted.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like,
it's just a different way of looking at the world.
Different way of looking at a lot
right?
of things, yeah.
So we are the children of Descartes in a lot of ways. And Descartes, remember, his project was, this science stuff is coming up. And it's explaining a lot of things, and it seems to be pushing God to the boundaries, and it's making stuff uncertain. So we need to find certainty. And he found that certainty in himself, right? I think, therefore I am. And his goal was to kind of eliminate subjectivity and uncertainty. And then the sciences kind of marched in step, like Newton and his development of physics, and the development of calculus, and the development of probability, and then later on statistics, and then Bayesian statistics, and all these things. And until Peter Bernstein wrote a really famous book called Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk. And his premise was, the fundamental difference between ancient times and modern times is that we have mastered risk. We figured out how to mitigate it and minimize it so that everything that we do is safer and better. And he makes the point that modern society couldn't exist with the kind of risk mitigation tools that existed in the first century or even the 12th century, because our society is so complicated. There are so many more, like driving on a highway at 75 miles per hour has a lot more inherent risk in it
Than riding a donkey.
than riding a donkey. A donkey is made by a donkey. A vehicle is made by 75,000 parts coming from 45 countries, and it's on a path of lots of other vehicles made from the same amount of complexity, where they're
with various levels of upkeep. I remember driving down 75 one time, and a guy had a cool truck, and his front wheel came off.
right.
Like, I mean, that's like not just normal, except it is kind of normal. That's it's like sometimes your front wheel just comes off if you don't tighten up your lug nuts.
Yeah. So science and technology has increased our control over the world. It's increased our understanding of the world.
Can you imagine telling an ancient person, hey, you are going to be 10 feet from a thing like a 6,000 pounds coming at you at 140 miles an hour? I mean, like if you're going 70 and they're going 70.
Yeah.
And they're like, I would never stand 10 feet away from a 140 mile an hour missile.
Right. Or you're saying like, hey, on Thursday, the temperature is going to be 74 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
Or Fahrenheit.
Probably not Celsius.
Well, I was thinking they're in the Middle East.
Oh, okay.
If I'd be closer.
Yeah, and you would just know. And you would be right within a couple of degrees.
Yeah. Our control and understanding of the world has increased so much that there's a narrative of like a move from religion to science. And now we've gone from this fatalistic, whatever happens, like there's dragons out there and there's, plagues and there's famines and whatever, and you can't control them. You just have to persevere in faith, to knowing the causes and effects of seemingly everything and insuring yourself and hedging and all of the things.
Now, weren't those also, those guys were men of faith, correct?
The old guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this isn't like them going, we're going to thwart God.
No.
They're going like, we're trying to figure, we want to know more about God. And I know that's how science was promulgated. Like, hey, you can even know more about God by knowing more about his creation and how he ordered things. Yeah. And so I just want to make sure that gets pointed out. These are not people trying to throw it in God's face.
Though that obviously shifts as time has gone on.
Yes.
But Bayes, one of the premier probability theorists, was a minister.
Isn't everybody? That's a Christian.
Fair.
Okay.
But if I say the dominant worldview, especially of the 20th century, was this idea that we are on the path of progress. We are conquering nature. We're conquering ignorance.
Yeah.
And we will be able to control all things. And soon,
the information age, baby, is going to do it.
Right. Soon we'll be living forever and we'll never die and all the things.
Yeah, doubt it. Because doesn't that change a little bit whenever the internet, everybody that didn't, remember all those people that had Yahoo stock and Netscape stock or 9/11 or I don't know, when everybody thought their house was going to be worth $100 bajillion in 2009.
Right.
And it was worth seven nickels.
7 nickels.
Or it's like, COVID, or even this week, like, we're not going to be in a war.
Right.
Except with a military action with Iran, not a war.
An outsider would say, surely they will give up on this thing. But our culture, and I'm not speaking just of America, but the West in general, we value knowledge and science and objectivity so deeply that even seemingly incontrovertible things, postmodernism is in essence the backlash against this kind of very modern, objective thing. But still, most people, I think, at least most experts, are very much in the we can figure it out, we can manage it, we can handle it.
We can control it.
We can
Like
control it.
eventually we can control it. I mean, that's one of my favorite. I love Peter Drucker, and he says, and I'm a guy that has lived near a lot of country roads. Trying to predict the future is like trying to drive down a country road at night with no lights on while looking out the back window. And that's 100% true.
If you're on some roads in West Texas,
Yeah.
you could do that for like an hour,
Yeah.
but not permanently.
Not permanently.
But the narrative, I think the narrative is breaking down because you have Daniel Kahneman wins the Nobel Prize for his work bringing psychology, human psychology into decision making, because you had this idea that all humans were kind of rational and they made decisions purely on the basis of logic. But he proved that humans are working in situations where they have limited knowledge, and this kind of field is called behavioral economics or the field of cognitive biases. And there are so many different ways where humans regularly and predictably make terrible decisions.
Yes. As a pastor, I can say amen to that. Yeah, I mean, and that's just on a singular scale, not even
Right.
you're talking about as on a global, a cultural scale, a national scale.
I think the fundamental point to be made there is, and Thomas Sowell made a similar point, and Hayek made a similar point, is that information has costs, and it's always limited and uncertain.
Yeah.
And so rationality always has to be bounded. It's always in quotation marks. It's always the best we can do now. Just before, in 2007, just before the Great Recession,
Yep.
Nicholas Nassim Taleb wrote a book called The Black Swan. And his premise is there's two worlds that you live in. And he gave them the funny names of Mediocristan and Extremistan. In Mediocristan, this is his analogy. He said if you have 1,000 people that go into a stadium and you weigh all of them, right? You come up with a total weight of something like 150,000, right? And then if the fattest person in the world gets on there, the fattest person of all time, let's say they weigh 1,000 pounds, well then 1,001 people weigh 151,000 pounds, and so the average weight goes from 150 to 151. So basically an unnoticeable difference. And that's kind of how conventional statistics works. It's like no matter how crazy that last outlier is, they don't affect anything. Well, he said, now let's do the same experiment. Let's say we've got 1,000 people, and we'll just make the math easy. They all have $100,000, right? So you've got $100 million, right? Anyway, if you took one more person, but that person was Bill Gates, it is quite likely that the amount of money that he has in the bank, quote unquote, in the bank,
His net worth.
His net worth is actually larger than all the other 1,000 people put together. So not only does he move the average significantly, it's like everybody on average is millionaires.
Yep.
The point is that Taleb is making is in certain realms, net worth, popularity of songs or musicians, like if you take 1,000 artists, their sales for the year, and then put Taylor Swift in there, the whole thing skews incredibly. Same thing for books, the same thing. And he says traditional statistics don't work and can't work philosophically.
I remember I didn't take very many statistics classes because I hate them in my math degree, but I took one and I asked they were like, oh, we gotta, you have, 1,000 people or whatever, and you average their answer, you put them on a chart or whatever,
Right.
do a sigma tau, or, whatever,
Right,
like all
right.
the different things. I don't even like them because I hate, like, statistics isn't math. It's numerical debate is all. And so, but I was like, well, what if we, it's only 1,000. Why don't we just count them up and plot them? And there goes, and then he goes, no, that won't work.
Right.
It'll mess up your graph. Like, you want it to have this nice even distribution that, whatever we were using would create.
The central limit theorem and all that. What Taleb is saying is like rare events in certain situations have a huge impact, and you don't always know which situations those are. So forecasting is actually impossible. And the example that he bases the title of the book on is, if you've seen 10,000 swans, and you think all swans are the same and they're all white. He says, and then you go and then you find that there's a black swan. There's no amount of math you can do on the 10,000s to predict the black swan. So his point was, there's a lot more risk out there than you think.
Yep.
And then the next year, the whole economy blew up with no one predicting it.
Yeah.
And he had bet that the economy was going to blow up. So he made both a ton of money and then sold a lot of books.
Yeah.
He's not a nice person.
No.
Which is interesting because he talks all the time about being humble about what you know, and he is very not.
I mean, so Drucker says the future is not an extension of today.
Right.
A lot of he really the quote is during tumultuous times.
Right.
The future is not, and so it's like, well, what's tumultuous? Well, whatever you think. And so, because a lot of times tomorrow is just a repeat of today. But during certain times, it's absolutely not, and everything changes.
Right.
And then Drucker will tell you, like, hey, if you can't predict the future, you got to create it.
There's a final scholar that kind of weighed in this kind of trend. It's the start of a transition to a new way of looking at the world. But Ulrich Beck, who's a sociologist, wrote about the risk society. And what he's saying is, actually our increased control of the world is creating more risks that we can't see, and that are also impossible to measure, like the risk of nuclear war, which didn't exist before, and the risk of environmental degradation. And so a lot of what we're doing now is creating new risks and then distributing them across humanity.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Noah had to worry about a cyber attack. The risk was approximately zero.
Identity theft wasn't really a thing. Or at least it was a harder thing.
You had to put the nose and the glasses on that looks like them,
right.
Not just say not send an email. Somebody tried to I theft my identity this week and tell church people to send them Apple gift cards on my behalf.
That's
terrible.
So nice of you.
Yeah, that's not what I meant. It wasn't me though.
It wasn't me.
So tell us about all these different risks.
There's a term that's developed that I think is really helpful. It's called moral hazard. And what it means is a lot of times, most of the time, maybe even all the time, risks are not fair or they're not symmetrical.
If you want fair, it's the first 2 weeks in September here in New Mexico.
Right. So there's 4 easy ways to look at it. One is I take a risk and you get the reward or the consequences.
That's not my favorite.
The other one is you take a risk and I get the reward or the consequences, right?
I also don't like that either.
The other one is I want to be safe and you have to pay for it. The other one is you want to be safe and I have to pay for it.
Yeah, that was fun.
So it's there's a million. It's not hard to understand. It's just one person does the thing or wants the thing and the other person has to pay for it. So too big to fail.
Would like another car.
Right.
And you have to pay for it.
Right. Too big to fail. I, as a bank, take lots of risk, more risk than maybe I take on my own because I know that if I get called, you guys are going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, we'll bail you out.
During the pandemic, I want to be very safe. You have to do all the things
that I want to,
so that I can be safe. Drug studies on people. You are going to have this thing poked into you.
Yep.
And if it works, I'm going to sell it for $1 bajillion and you get your $20.
Yeah. I will pay you handsomely $20.
Yeah.
American.
The big problem with social medicine, socialized medicine, if you want to look at it that way, is there's an asymmetry between the payment and the benefit. So your incentives to stay healthy and to work out and to do things kind of goes down. Now, there's obviously lots of ways to deal with all of these things, but in all of these cases, the debates about the risk are debates about your values or debates about your morals. I love this quote from Paul Slovic, who's thought about risk as much as anybody has. He says, risk, and he puts it in quotes, risk does not exist out there. What he's saying is it's not objective. It doesn't exist out there independent of our minds and our culture waiting to be measured. Human beings have invented the concept of risk to help them understand and cope with the dangers and uncertainties of life. Although the dangers are real, there is no such thing as real risk or objective risk. Defining risk is thus an exercise in power, which this dude is not a postmodernist. He's not in the deconstructionist agenda, but what he's saying is he's kind of deconstructing that narrative somehow. Like, risk isn't objective. We decide what risk is, and then we decide what we're going to do to mitigate it, and then we decide who has to pay for it. That's coming from whoever has the power to do those things.
Yeah. You see that. I mean, that's big companies, government,
Why do I have to fill out this form? Why do I have to take 20 hours of sexual harassment training every year? So if my company gets sued, they don't have to pay a fine.
Yeah.
Right? Because we did our best.
We tried.
And that's not illogical.
And they paid you for 20 hours of work. That's what they think it's worth.
So this idea, I think it's just super important for us to, especially as believers, to recognize, like, risks are very personal. Like, what feels like a risk to me or what feels like a risk to you is not going to feel like risk to other people. And it's going to spark debates, because when I try to get the world or my relationship groups to conform to my subjective perceptions of risk, that's a power struggle. And it's a moral debate. It's, you don't care about this thing that's very important to me. And you don't judge the risks in the same way that I do. Therefore, you're a bad person.
Yeah. And I remember I read a book about VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when those, it was developed by the Army War College in the 80s to describe turbulent times.
Mm-hmm.
But I read it in a business book. And basically, when you would deal with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, people tend to make really bad decisions.
Right. It's true.
Why is that?
First one is all the stuff that we discovered. We've increased our control. We've increased our knowledge. But we're still, according to Taleb and also the Bible, like, we're still creatures who don't know so much. Yeah. So there's always going to be elements of risk. But then this stuff that the psychologists figured out, which is really interesting. And if you're in business or you work, looking into cognitive biases is really worthwhile, right? So a cognitive bias is just a predictable directional error in judgment that arises when people rely on mental shortcuts or heuristics rather than formal reasoning. That's how Kahneman defines it. So that may not make sense to you, but let's just look at some easy examples of really common ways that people make mistakes. Cognitive bias, that people love to be certain. People do not like cognitive dissonance. They do not like uncertainty.
Yeah.
So a lot of people ignore uncertainty, predictably, unless there's an incentive or a personality trait. Like, people are going to ignore uncertainty. They're going to avoid discussing risks or negative outcomes. Now, how is that going to work? I mean,
I know from living in the panhandle of Texas that if you just ignore it, it usually just goes away.
Yeah.
Health issues, financial problems, all of the uncertainty just goes away.
We were working in this Civil War setting, and people just kept assuming that stuff was just going to get, it's just going to, pretty soon we're going to know what's going to happen, and then we're just going to make a plan, and then it's going to work. And
Bada bing, bada boom.
Bada bing, bada boom. And it's like, guys, I think we're really wanting to be certain about something that can't be certain. So we need to assume that it's going to be uncertain and then figure out how we can still work. Another really common one, temporal discounting or a bias for the present, which means if I say, do you want $1,000 tomorrow or $990 today? Most people will take $990 today. And the farther out that goes, the bigger the discount. And you can there's actually a formula that you can do. Say, hey, if it's 3 months, you can offer somebody this much less, and most of the time they're going to take it. And that's just, I mean, some of it is not as irrational as you think, because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, and maybe you have a real need today. But because it's so predictable, it's more like everybody has a just so story that justifies why, I would normally, it's more rational to take the extra $300 in a month, because I can't make that much on any investment in that amount of time. But I've got X, Y, Z.
I got bills to pay and mouths to feed.
Right.
Yep. I can't even remember the name of the book that talked about this VUCA, but they called it Circling the Wagons. Right. That's the loss aversion.
Right. That's super common.
Super common, especially when you have somebody at the top, like somebody who's in middle management that is ultra loyal and very relational. It's like, no. Let's gather us together, and we're going to protect us over everything else.
Right. And if you were to ask a computer, okay, computer, you make $1,000 a month. Now, in 2026, I'm going to pay you $2,000 a month. But then in 2027, I'm going to pay you $1,000 a month again. A computer says, great, I got $12,000 extra dollars. I'm very happy. A human being says, you sorry son of a gun.
I can't handle that. Yeah, you stole
my $1,000.
You stole $1,000 from me every month.
Right. And then people will actually say, I would rather not get the raise.
Yep.
That's loss aversion. It hurts worse to lose something than it makes you happy to gain the same thing.
Yep.
Warren Buffett was talking the other day. He says, I know guys that are making tens of millions of dollars a year, and their time is so valuable, they're so busy, and they will get on the phone for 2 hours to haggle down a $150 late charge that they didn't deserve. Because it's like, I don't want to lose that $150, even though my time per hour is worth way more.
I mean, it's almost, you see this too, even like in retrospect, where people are like, remember when everything was better, when we were just all poor?
Yeah.
You see that a lot in developing. It's like, oh, it's bad now. But when we were all poor, nobody had anything. And
the one that's become maybe the most important now that we live in the social media era is the availability heuristic, which just says whatever the worst thing was that has happened recently feels like it's the most common thing. This is the effect where your grandmother sees that a plane fell down somewhere in the world and immediately thinks that you're going to die on your next flight, even though the risk of dying in a plane crash is like 1/100th the risk of dying in a car crash. But it feels the risk of a terrorist attack. There are so many risks that seem so high.
Is this why every one of our grandparents saved so much because the worst thing that ever happened to them was the Great Depression.
I think that that's actually a more rational thing. But it's also like, why are they worried more about a terrorist than worried about the flu? When at their age, the odds that the flu kills them is 100 times more, 100,000 times more.
And then there's one more, right?
Yeah, the status quo bias. This is a cognitive bias that I don't find as irrational, but it's a bias because you're not thinking about why you're holding to it. It's just a shortcut. And that is the bias towards whatever you're at right now. It's I've been here for 5 years. I got this other offer.
We've always done things this way.
We've always done this way. It's why electric cars weren't a thing until a new company came in making electric cars. It's why old companies, even though they have decided advantages in size and reach and capitalization, struggle with up-and-coming organizations that are small, but they're doing things in new ways.
Well, I mean, this is like, I've talked about that book, Predictable Success, and they talk about if the company goes from predictable success to the treadmill, meaning like this is what we do. I mean, there's a reason that Kodak sold off its whole campus. I mean, they invented digital cameras and then just licensed it. BlackBerry. I mean, there was a time in our lives that everybody in business had a BlackBerry and preferred it over an iPhone.
It's true.
And now RIM, which is the company that owns BlackBerry, you just see them like for sale every now and again. They just kind of get bounced around.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And these are all things that, if I say they're the low energy option, they're the path of least resistance.
They're familiar.
All humans default to cognitive biases to a greater or lesser extent. But then there are ways.
Like I remember my grandma paid like $30 a month to have a rotary phone in her house.
Because she knew how to work it.
Well, no, she didn't use it. But she's like, I know that if the power goes out, I can use this phone because it's hard. And she rented it from the phone company for 45 years, even though she had a cell phone.
Right.
But she's like, I know when the power goes out, you can still use this rotary telephone.
Right.
It's like, who are you going to call, Granny? Nobody.
Hopefully he's that one whose cell phone battery is still charged.
Yeah. But I mean, and so, but that's, I mean, if you've ever seen a family member, not, like you said, not take a job, even though it's more money, it's, it's like, well, but I don't know about that company. And, this company I'm working for, they've been around a long time and they're going to still be around. It's like, yeah, that other company's been around a long time too, Dad.
There's reasons to choose the status quo. But what we're talking about here when we talk about cognitive bias is when you're reflexively wanting to stay in.
That's like that. That's where you prioritize in volatility, uncertainty, complexity,
or even just regular life. You're saying like, hey, whatever happens, it's going to be worse to lose this money than it would be to get it. So I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
I prefer to get stuff now than later because, I just do.
So that's my bias is I just prefer not to have money.
Right.
Because if I got more money, I'd be like, oh man, now I could lose it. And okay, I chose ministry. I chose well in ministry.
I think we can say that, and this is kind of where the rubber starts to hit the road, is following Jesus is going to affect the way that we view, that we assess, and that we manage these risks that are coming on us.
You're going to have to tell us more about that. How does following Jesus change the way we assess and manage risk?
Well, first, risks are exposure to hazards. We talked about that a little bit. So the danger is real. The risk is subjective. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So there's a 1 in 10,000 chance of an earthquake happening based on everything we know about earthquakes. That's real. How much I'm exposed to that, how afraid I am of that, that's my personal and subjective risk. So some hazards are reduced or mitigated through the formation of strong communities of faith founded on sacrificial love. So your risk of starving to death, provably less if you are part of a group of committed believers, because we don't let our members starve to death. Your chance of being in super tough poverty. There's a buffer there because your community is able to help you handle financial shocks. Where we really got our notoriety in the first several centuries is that we took care of people that were super sick, even though it was risky because we have a different set of values. And so the way that we assess risk is different. There's also kind of a mitigation of hazards or risks through pursuing wisdom. A lot of the wisdom literature, like we didn't have words for cognitive bias until Kahneman and the rest of the behavioral economy people, but we still knew that almost all of these things are common sense things.
Like, look at the ant.
Yeah.
That was a way to get you to be biased towards something wise and not something bad.
So sure, they didn't say temporal discounting, but they said, hey, the ant works even though it's not, he doesn't need that food stored up.
Yeah.
So he'll be ready. That's saying, hey, you got to think about the future.
Don't just think about today. Think about tomorrow and in the next year. Think about hard times.
Think about hard times. Think about what could go wrong. Think about risk. I know it's not fun to think about if you have enough money to finish the tower, but you know what's way worse? You can't build the tower because you don't have enough money.
And everybody makes fun of you.
And everybody makes fun of you.
Don't be that guy.
Recognition of limitations, so that having a believer should be more humble in what they know and what they don't know. We should handle our finances better with less of these kind of biases because there's a lot of literature around. Don't put yourself in debt to other people. Don't lend without thinking about the consequences.
Even just the act of generosity makes you think about your finances. How many people do I see? It's a lot, man, of like, they get into the problem with finances because they don't look at them. They couldn't tell you how much money they have. They couldn't tell you how much money they spend. I mean, in fact, that's what Dave Ramsey and those guys, that's what, it's like, well, how much do you spend? Well, how much do you make? And a lot of them don't know. And so even just being generous makes you look at like, well, what can I give? What can I
sure
give away?
Yeah. And then there's some risks that just like, hey, if you're adhere to a Christian ethical framework, like your risk of STDs goes to very, very low rates.
Yeah, because your sexual morality is much lower.
Right. Now, that being said, it also increases or exacerbates some risks by calling people to holy or countercultural practices. So, being honest when everybody else is cheating on certain things, that doesn't just cost you money or something. It also pisses everybody off.
Big time.
Because you're making them look bad.
Yep.
You think you're better than they are. Religious persecution risk goes way up if you become a committed Christian, especially in certain place.
Yeah.
There are those risks. When you refuse to sleep with Potiphar's wife, that decreased your risk of STDs, but it increased your risk of getting thrown in prison because she's got power over your life.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the stories of faith in Hebrews 11 are often examples of this increase of risk. Like, hey, maybe you're going to get thrown into a lion's den.
You're going to get made fun of because it's never rained before.
Right.
And you're building a boat where there's no water, dummy.
Finally, it changes the way that you order risks. So remember, for the billionth time, hazards are objective in some sense, though not perfectly knowable. Like they're subject to the limitations of our knowledge, but they're out there. But risks are our evaluation of those things, and they're changeable as our culture changes, as our priorities change. The risk of missing a meal or two is different if you have kids or if you don't. Because if it's just you're like, I can miss a meal or two. I might be a little unhappy. But if my kids miss a meal or two,
My 3-year-olds miss 2 meals.
That's a different game. So let's just look at a few biblical commands to reorder risks. Matthew 10:28, fear God, not people.
Don't worry about the one who can kill the body. Worry about the one who can cast the soul into hell. That's
normal people should fear the thing that they can see, not the invisible thing.
Yeah.
But believers.
Jesus tells us, no, you worry about the invisible thing.
Worry
way
about
more.
that invisible thing. You don't see it. It's like
That's the one that gets you.
It's like 2007 and the Great Recession's coming. Like, you don't see it, but it's going to get you.
It's going to get you, yeah.
Jesus says whoever wants to save their life is going to lose it. And that's not talking about just with respect to believing in God, but an orientation towards what kind of actions you're going to take. Like if you just look out for yourself, that's not going to work out for you very well.
One of my favorites is to live as Christ and to die as gain. Which one do I want? Both. Both favorites.
Both favorites. But if I had my druthers,
yeah,
I'd go and be with God.
Go be with God, yeah.
Yeah.
But until he takes me, I'm just not gonna, yeah.
Yeah. In Hebrews 11, it says, Moses chose to be mistreated with the people of God rather than enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. So it's saying, like, hey, you can either enjoy these things that are naturally desirable, that make sense, that feel good, or you can go be treated like a slave and mistreated because you're identifying with the people of God.
There's a lot of them, man.
I think Paul in Romans 8 kind of sums it up. He says all the stuff that we're suffering at the present time isn't worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed. And so I think if we summed it up, we say Christians, as followers of Jesus, we should value different things on different timescales based on different sources of wisdom and knowledge than other people.
Yeah.
And that's faith and wisdom coming together.
Reordering the way you think about risk is so interesting to me. And it's something that has happened in my life that I haven't thought about. So sometimes you just go, well, okay, you see in Scripture, God's going to provide. You're like, okay, I'm going to try to be like that. And I remember in my 20s, I was 26 when Owen was born. And so the third kid, 26, 27, 28 years old, and I'm thinking to myself, God's going to provide this $75 and I have no idea how he's going to do it.
Right.
It's 75. It's not like a lot of money, but it was 75 more dollars than I had.
Right. Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, how can I trust God? How can I be wise? I didn't go out and say, well, God's going to, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. So I'm going to spend $200 in money I don't have in debt because he's going to give me $300.
That would be foolish.
Foolish. And he doesn't suffer fools. So, but I just know that seeing God do that has really helped me reorder the way that I think about risk and the way that I think about what is a priority when doing casual risk assessment.
Right. Yeah. And I think
organic, I wouldn't, I don't sit down and do a risk analysis, but even just in my mind when I'm oh, God's going to take care of that.
If I had one thing that I really hope folks take away is this idea that risks are not out there. They're the instantiation, the whatever of our values, just like our actions are. So I don't always act in accordance with my highest values, but at that moment, what I valued was what I did.
Yeah.
And as we look at risks, it's the same kind of a thing. At the moment when I'm looking at the risk, that is an expression of my values.
There we go. Not an extension.
Yeah, or an excrescence. There was a lot of words that were in there that we're trying to get out.
True lessons.
And if we go from there, we see that if our values are being transformed to be more like Christ, then the way we view risks should be transformed to be more like Christ. And then the way that we work, which is based on the way we view risks, should also be different because we value different things on different time scales based on different sources of knowing than people who don't believe in Jesus.
I have a real question for you, and this is a little. It's not a rabbit trail; it's more of an application. What if somebody says, "Man, Josh, I love Jesus. I pray. I read my Bible. I feel like I'm growing. I've grown in knowledge and then some, steadfastness and trying virtue and, all the things we talked about last week, I believe. But man, I'm getting older and I'm getting more anxious. They've gone to the counselor. It's not just like an anxiety, you know what I mean?
Right.
But like, what would you tell them?
That's a great question. I think anxiety doesn't come from nowhere. I think anxiety has sources.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some ways in which at the current moment feeling more anxious than at other moments is valid, because the world is in one of those occasional time periods where things change relatively faster.
Well, and even just, I was less anxious when my children were preteens and not driving.
Right. Yeah, sometimes risk objectively, or the hazards that your children are exposed to are objectively higher.
Or even just riding with them.
Yeah, just riding with them.
Myself, too, just anxious for myself.
I think what I would first do is walk through the scriptural things, like this is the things that I'm feeling anxious about. I'm commanded to take these to God, to remember to be thankful in those moments. And then the peace of God is going to comfort me. But then I also think that if you try to take that verse and disassociate it from the rest of the Bible, for example, the next verse, so don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is right, whatever is noble, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, set your mind on such things. And then it talks about whatever you have learned or heard or received from me or seen in me, put these things into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So it's like this big inclusio.
Yeah.
And we want to just do the prayer part.
I prayed about it.
And
I'm still anxious, so it didn't work.
And forget about, hey, maybe we need to pay attention to doing the thing and paying attention to the best things. Yeah. And then all of that kind of works together to...
I know in me when things get out of order, when I fear not the one who could cast my soul into hell, but fear the one who could kill the body. When I fear the thing because I didn't look at the ant and chose the present.
Yeah.
When I gave into my bias, of like, well, I'm just going to just keep doing this because I've always done it. Like, and I forget that faith is the thing that needs to spur me on to act, and it's unseen. As much as I want to control it and as much as I can navigate, I have to not give in to that.
Right. That faith, that underlying everything, that belief that God is in control, that God knows what's happening, that God loves us and wants the best for us and is working all things together for the good. If that's not part of the things that you're reflecting on pretty frequently, I don't think there's any way to avoid anxiety.
No.
And then the TLDR is probably get off social media for a while.
Quit watching the news.
Quit watching the news for a minute.
Yeah. But I think this goes into this Bonhoeffer quote that I think you even said it last episode, and I really like it. It's like, in faith, I can bear everything, I hope. That's what he says. Mm. Even a conviction, even the other dreaded consequences, meaning death. But an anxious outlook wears one down. And man, no truer words have been penned, that being anxiety-filled wears you out. So please don't worry about me if something worse occurs. Other brethren have gone through it already. But a faithless wavering back and forth and endless consulting without action, is shrinking from risk. That is a real danger. I must be able to have the certainty that I am in God's hand and not in human hands, and then everything will become easy, even the hardest privation. We need to learn to act differently than those who keep on hesitating. whose failure we know in the wider context, we must become clear about what one wants and one must question whether one can take responsibility for it. And then, with unconquerable confidence, one must do it.
Yeah. I think the application there for Bonhoeffer is super practical. And that should spur us to think on what it practically is the change in the way that we live our lives and the way that we approach the work that we do, because we have a different set of priorities, a different set of values, a different framework for analyzing risk. I mean, I can think of a lot. Donald Simmons in The Steward Investor talks about investing in business in a way that is willing to take higher risks in order to help more vulnerable people instead of only prioritizing profit. This is Jeff Johns and the impact investing stuff. Hey, I know that the money of this world is not all there is. I'm willing to take a risk in order to help other people. Van Duzer wrote a book called Why Business Matters to God. He talks about creating businesses that make a profit but exist to serve people well. So profit is the means and not the end. That's that kind of servant leadership switch. John Piper talks about being willing to work in places that are more dangerous because you're able to do more good there than you would in a regular place. Doctors who take on riskier patients, which many will refer out in order to preserve their success rate and reduce their insurance load and all those things. But that's more in line with like the biblical values. There's a management thing. Like I think reordering risks means you're more willing to give your subordinates the freedom to make decisions and the responsibility, because that's how God treats Adam and Eve. God doesn't say, Adam, you can name these animals better than me, or I don't have time. He says, God, Adam, for your good, I want you to name the animals. I would love to see believers being on the cutting edge of technology, taking risks to be at the front so that our values for people and for others get imprinted on there. So often we are the most conservative force.
And we become critics.
And we become critics instead of
people who are doing the thing.
People who are doing the thing. And people who are setting the way the thing is going to be done. Maybe sometimes that's good, but how can it be good that nothing changes? Right? We're not setting trends in music. We're following. We're 10 years behind, or 5 years behind maybe now. We're not setting trends in architecture. We're behind. But who built the first cathedrals? Who wrote the first operas? Who wrote when those things were coming out, believers were the ones doing the innovation. And it feels like now, and maybe that's not fair, but maybe it is. It seems like it is. We should be less willing to do bad things. Like we should be more willing to not follow orders that are evil.
We should be more willing to investigate allegations.
Right, more willing to investigate allegations, even into spiritual people.
Yep.
We should be, there's so many things that should change. Bonhoeffer set such a good example for us, not only in the way that he lived, but in the way that he talked about the way he lived. Because he didn't say, I'm not afraid. He didn't say everything is good. He didn't say I made the right decisions. What he said was, I looked at it, I made a choice in faith, and then I've taken the consequences and I don't regret it.
Yeah.
And you know what? I hope that it's an encouragement to you. You don't need to worry about me because God is in control.
Well, Josh, to risk all of our audience quitting this podcast and do the wise thing, we need to wrap it up.
Right, fine.
So give us a recap.
Risk is subjective, but following Jesus requires both wisdom and faith.
I think you've talked about our views on risk. They've changed a lot. And even though we can predict the weather now with some certainty, we can't predict a week out or 6 months out. And that just goes to show uncertainty will never be eliminated.
We've solved the two-body problem in physics, but the three, not the 10 million, but the three-body problem is in principle unsolvable.
Unsolvable, yeah.
The definitions of risks is an exercise in power. And the repercussions of those decisions and definitions are not equally distributed.
I think in this one, I need to, because it's easy to say, hey, people don't naturally make good choices under uncertainty. But what I should really say is I do not naturally make good choices. You, the listener, do not naturally make good, because it's easy to be like, yeah, those people out there, they make bad choices naturally. But we naturally do not make good choices under uncertainty.
Go read the prelude to Proverbs, those first 7 chapters where they're just building up. You have to seek wisdom or you're really going to suffer. Following Jesus and wisdom and faith should change not only our values, not only our actions, but also the way that we look at risks.
And a wise, faithful view of risk should change even the way that we work.
This week, we'd like you to remember the same Bible verse that we talked about last week. It's Matthew 10:16. Behold, I am sending you out as a sheep in the midst of wolves. So be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Last week, we kind of really focused on faith, which I think of as being as innocent as doves, that belief in providence in God. This week, we've talked more about the wise as serpents part. The world is full of wolves. There's so many bad things that could happen. There's so many complexities. There's so many uncertainties. You're going to need both. You're going to need that wisdom and you're going to need that faith. Try to have a conversation with your spouse or a good friend over a meal. Take some time and discuss the risks in your life. The risk you're taking at work, that may be uncomfortable. That's why it's important to have a good meal and a good friend. Are you taking enough good risks? Are you taking too many foolish risks? These are questions that it's difficult for us to ask ourselves, and it's great to ask in community.
We hope you've enjoyed this. Learning to follow Jesus at work requires real face-to-face community and relationships, and we hope that you find that wherever you are.
Thanks for joining us. If you have comments or questions or ideas for a topic, reach out to us at our email address, which wisely has been lengthened to at least 75 characters.
Amen.
The Gospel Works Podcast at gracechurchabq.org. Next week, we'll talk about one of the most uncertain areas we can think of, the future of work.
Well, until then, for Josh, my name is Aaron, and this is the Gospel Works Podcast.